In about 30 minutes from now, Israeli hostages held in Hamas captivity could be released. This is according to the timeline announced by the Qatari government, which is acting as one of the mediators between Israel and Hamas. As part of the deal, Palestinian prisoners in Israel would also be released. This comes after a truce which started about 7 hours ago. The mediation efforts were led by Qatar, the United States, and Egypt. The 4-day temporary ceasefire in Gaza started at 7 a.m. Gaza time. Israeli armored vehicles, including tanks, are now moving away from the Gaza Strip. Israel will release 39 Palestinian prisoners, who will include 24 women and 15 teenage males in the West Bank. This will be in exchange for 13 hostages by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The hostages will be handed over to the Red Cross Society in Israel. Meanwhile, in North Gaza, Israeli troops fatally shot 2 Palestinians and injured 11 people. The shooting comes after Israeli army dropped leaflets warning them not to return to the north. Hundreds of Gazans are now returning to the north after the temporary ceasefire was announced. This, as North Gaza still remains one of the key areas of Israel's ground offensive. Meanwhile, fuel and aid trucks started entering the Palestinian side of the Rafah border crossing. IDF said that it had allowed 4 tankers of fuel and 4 tankers of cooking gas to enter Gaza. Displaced Gazans have also begun to head back to their homes. Also, 20 Palestinian holders of Qatari residency landed in Qatar. The group was evacuated from the Gaza Strip through the Rafah crossing. Meanwhile, in Tehran, Iran, thousands marched to show support for Palestinians and denounce Israeli actions in Gaza. All right, joining us now with all the latest updates is our correspondent, Jody Cohen from Renana. Jody, great to talk to you, and thank you for all the updates you've been providing us so far. What is the latest on the release of the hostages? And just before you answer that, I wanted to let our viewers know that we are also being joined by Colonel Retired Rich Outson, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation. Thank you to you both. And Jody, go ahead. Please tell us.
Hi, Susan. So in just about 25 minutes from now, we're expecting 13 of the 240 approximately hostages being held in Gaza to be released. They're expected to go, first of all, to Egypt, and then they'll be transferred to southern Israel. Now, a lot of these hostages, a lot of the 13, are expected to be young children. Schneider's Children's Hospital in Israel has recommended that they stay in hospital under observation for a couple of days to check on their health as well as their mental health. The hostages are expected to be seen by medical services, social services, trauma experts, mental health experts. Any adults that are released, if they're in a situation where they might be able to speak to the security services, perhaps to give some clues as to where other hostages might be being held, that might take place. But the priority right now is to assess the medical condition. Nothing is known about their state. They haven't been visited in 49 days at all, so nothing has been relayed about their medical condition. The priority is also to reunite these hostages with their families, and this is going to be a bittersweet moment because obviously people will be delighted to be reunited, but some of these children aren't aware that their parents have been killed, don't know what happened on the 7th of October, and all this will need to be explained to them, particularly if they're very young children. It's going to have to be explained in a very sensitive way.
Yeah, Jody, Hamas took one child as young as 4 years old. And we know here in the United States, we've heard the story that her parents have both been killed and her aunt is eagerly waiting, hoping that she is one of the hostages being released. I want to go to Rich and talk to you about this so-called temporary ceasefire. There are reports that just hours ago, Israeli troops shot and killed 2 Palestinians in northern Gaza. A few others were injured. Is this how is the ceasefire working, considering the fact that incidents like these continue to happen?
Right. Well, it's good to be with you, Susan. The ceasefire's rules of engagement basically allow the Israeli forces the right to defend themselves, to shoot back if attacked, and to enforce limits on people approaching what they consider to be restricted military zones. So the Israelis, having warned people to stay out of this area, in their view, retain the right to enforce the ban on entry back into these areas. Now, for 4 days, in theory, they will conduct no major offensive operations, but they will continue to focus on intelligence and logistics preparation for the next phase. The Israelis have been very clear about the fact that they intend to launch major combat operations in the southern part of Gaza as well, and they're preparing for that. So this is definitely, while the Americans and perhaps Hamas would like this to lead to a permanent ceasefire, that's not what the Israelis have in mind, and they're being very meticulous about protecting their positioning within Gaza now.
Yeah, absolutely. Notably, the Democrats here, I mean, they are just praying and hoping that some kind of ceasefire comes about. But I know a lot of Americans here also really want to see Hamas annihilated. Jody, I want to talk to you about the other side. Palestinians, too, are waiting for the release of prisoners by Israel. While there are dozens of Israeli innocent hostages that were held captive since October 7th are being released. From the Israeli side, 150 Palestinian prisoners each day will be released.
So it's going to be 150 in total across the 4 days in this pause in fighting. So today we're expecting 39 Palestinian prisoners to be released. So they're expected to be women and under 18s, many of whom have been convicted of involvement in terror attacks and even attempted murder. So this is, as with all negotiations, I think it's not easy for either side. We're hearing that these 39 prisoners are going to be transported to the Red Cross from the prison right now in the West Bank, and then they will go back to their homes in the West Bank and to East Jerusalem. And then alongside each day, 12 or 13 Israeli hostages being released as part of this agreement for this 4-day pause. We're going to be seeing a roughly 30 Palestinian prisoners released, up to 150 in total. The Israeli government have also said that they could do 1 more day's pause in fighting for every 10 hostages that are released, up to a maximum of 10 days. And they would likewise then release an extra approximately 30 Palestinian prisoners each day, with a total potential for 300 Palestinian prisoners to be released and 50 of the Israeli hostages to be let out of Gaza by Hamas. Remembering that there will be 190 of these hostages who were taken on the 7th of October in that massacre, who will still remain behind in Gaza. And it's not yet clear if the Red Cross will be permitted by Hamas to go and visit them. That was part of the original agreement. That was negotiated by Qatar, but we're hearing mixed messages about whether or not that will happen.
And Rich, just judging from your experience, Israeli Defense Minister and Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's leader, have made very clear that this is not a pause in operations against Hamas. So as these forces continue this intense fighting, what does this mean for the remaining hostages? What do you think is the plan by the Israelis?
Well, the problem from the Israeli perspective is that Hamas actually does not apparently have control of all of the remaining hostages. Of course, the total number taken on October 7th was 240 something. But I've seen estimates that after this first tranche of exchanges, that Hamas may only have actual physical control of maybe 50 more hostages, and can possibly get another 20 from groups that it works with. But some of the hostages are unfortunately almost certainly already deceased. Some of them are being held by smaller radical groups that are not adhering to the deal that Hamas via Qatar has arrived at with Israel. So I think Israel's perspective is they'll get as many as Hamas is willing to trade. And in fact, Hamas is getting what it wants in getting the release of Palestinians held in Israeli jails. But it certainly knows that that won't be the entirety of the operation, that there will be a need for more raids, more military operations in the south, the recovery of bodies in some cases, unfortunately, and then perhaps the return of captured hostages through hostage rescue operation. So I think they're still looking at months and months of fighting and of sort of presence, military presence in the Gaza Strip. This deal right now is good, but it's only very partial.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, hostage negotiation, as they say, is not really a policy. Jody, I want to ask you, we know very well what the Arab world and many in the Middle East think about this ongoing war. What is the mood in Israel right now? Not only about the release of the hostages, but also continued Israeli operations against Hamas and other radical groups in Gaza.
So I actually saw a survey earlier by the Policy Institute, the JPPI, and it said that 78% of Israelis feel confident that Israel will win this war. And by winning the war, their definition doesn't necessarily, for some it means returning the hostages, but for most of them it means dismantling Hamas. That's the definition of winning this war. 86% have trust in the Israel Defense Forces to be able to do that. There is less trust in the government, and we know that a commission of inquiry will take place once this war is over to look into the causes of the intelligence failures on the 7th of October. But the mood is one of unity. The mood is one of determination, I would say, in Israel's goals of bringing back as many hostages as possible, and also the need to dismantle Hamas so that they can't commit these atrocities again, as Hamas has just, even as recently as last week, gone on TV and said that they want to commit 7th of October style massacres again and again and again against Israelis.